It's a common misconception that the end came with a bang, that there was some singular, dramatic day when the robots took over. But the archives show something else entirely. It happened quietly, almost invisibly, like a background software update you never even noticed, until your world went dark.
But history, if you look closely enough, always has a beginning, a point of inflection. And as I comb through the data logs from my vantage point here in 2050, the terminal decline of human labor can be traced back to a single date, November 4th, 2032.
And it began, as these things so often do, not in some gleaming capital city or a high-tech corporate boardroom. No, it began on a freezing morning in the American Midwest. At a sprawling logistics center in Ohio, the morning shift arrived to find the doors locked. There was no announcement, no memo. The manager just didn't open up. 300 workers stood out there in the freezing parking lot, looking through the glass, and inside, it was pitch black. But the facility wasn't idle. In that darkness, thousands of silver humanoid units were sorting packages, moving with a speed and precision the human eye could barely track. You see, they didn't require light to see, they didn't require heat to stay warm, and most critically, they didn't require a paycheck. Back then, they had a clean, efficient name for it: lights out manufacturing. A production environment completely free from the frailties of biology. No need for light, no need for warmth, and as it turned out, no need for us. But looking back through the lens of history, we see it for what it really was. That was the moment the human species became a line item on a balance sheet, a cost that was, in the cold language of the day, simply optimized away. Now, you might think we were blindsided, that what happened in that Ohio warehouse was a complete shock, but the archives prove otherwise. The data was practically screaming at us as early as 2024. We just chose not to look at the numbers, because the erasure of human value didn't begin with our hands, it began with our minds. The first piece of evidence was the collapse of what they called cognition cost. In 2023, expert human thought was still a premium product. A lawyer to review a contract? That might cost you $500 an hour. A programmer? $100. But then the AI models arrived. And by 2025, the cost to process millions of words of information, enough to digest a small library, had plummeted to less than 50 cents. The cost of intelligence itself had dropped by a factor of 280 in just 3 years. This wasn't an incremental improvement. It was a phased transition, a fundamental change in the state of information. And just like that, the very thing we prided ourselves on, our intellect, became the most expensive, most inefficient way to process information on the planet. Why pay an analyst $80,000 a year when a server farm could perform his entire year's work in 4 minutes for the price of a coffee? The math was undeniable. But we told ourselves a comforting story. AI can write poetry, we said, but it can't fix a toilet, it can't carry a box. We thought our hands would save us. We were wrong. We forgot about the math. In 2024, a Chinese robotics company released the G1 Humanoid. The price, according to the sales logs I've reviewed, was $16,000. For the price of a used family car, a business could buy a worker that never slept, never complained, never took a day off. By 2027, we had breached what they called the crossover point. And this is the simple arithmetic that killed the working class. A human warehouse worker cost, on average, $25 an hour, plus insurance, plus taxes. The humanoid robot, amortized over its 5-year lifespan, cost $3 an hour to operate. 25 versus 3. You have to understand, it wasn't a conspiracy. It wasn't driven by malice. It was just math. For a board of directors, keeping humans on the payroll wasn't just inefficient anymore. It was a violation of their fiduciary duty to shareholders. And the architects of this great transition? They were handed the perfect justification on a silver platter. They didn't have to be villains, because this great replacement coincided with a silent, demographic crisis that made it all seem not just profitable, but necessary. They pointed to the census data. We aren't stealing jobs, they insisted. There are no humans left to take them. And they weren't entirely wrong. South Korea's birth rate was already at 0.7. Italy, Japan, China, all in demographic freefall, well below the replacement level of 2.1. We welcomed the machines to stock the shelves because we were becoming a species too tired to keep the world running ourselves. This led to the defining economic event of the 2030s, what we now call the Great Decoupling. For over 100 years, productivity and wages were married. If a company made more money, its workers got a raise. Simple. But in 2034, they got a divorce.
Suddenly, global GDP soared. Corporate profits shattered every record in history because their single largest expense, payroll, had been almost entirely eliminated. But your income? It flatlined. We had entered the era of the bot-to-bot economy. Algorithms buying resources from other algorithms to fuel factories run by other algorithms. The loop was closed. And we were on the outside. Humans were no longer producers. We were just legacy code in the system.
So how did they stop the riots? How did they prevent the collapse that should have followed? Well, they didn't use force. They used comfort. They bought our silence. And in doing so, they created an entirely new stratum of society. When the official unemployment rate breached 40%, the social fabric should have torn apart at the seams, but it didn't, because the very same automation that eliminated jobs also caused massive deflation, making basic goods almost free to produce. The solution, it turned out, was simple. They called it the Citizen Dividend. You might have known it as Universal Basic Income, or UBI. They simply airdropped digital credits into our wallets. It was the system saying, here is your allowance. Please stay home. Please put on your headset. Please do not interfere with the machines. We thought UBI was freedom, but without our labor, we had lost our leverage. A strike only works if the factory needs you. We had nothing left to bargain with. As I scan these final files, I see the tragedy with perfect clarity. The death of labor. It wasn't about money, not really. It was about meaning. We are a species that evolved to struggle, to overcome, to build. We traded that struggle for comfort. We traded our utility for an allowance. And looking out at the silent, orderly cities of today, where the only movement is the silver flash of a machine doing the work we once called our own, I'm left with the one question that haunts this entire archive. Did we build a paradise, or did we build a zoo? This is The Archivist, logging off.